you a little bit of an overview of what's happening in Latin America today and what some of the trends are. With few exceptions, Colombia being one of them, Latin America is arguably one of the most democratic regions in the world today. This is because of the vibrancy of its social movements, which have, over the last 10 years or so, pushed their demands for land reform, for the control of natural resources, and the rollback of free market policies to the forefront of national as well as international debate. Moreover, these social movements have really been behind the election of a whole series of new left-leaning governments throughout the region that are actually trying to tackle the problem of inequality and not just helping a few people get richer, which has been the case not only in Latin America, but I think in the United States for a long time. Some of the most notable of these governments are in Bolivia, the government of Evo Morales. Evo Morales is originally a coca grower. He was elected in 2005 as a candidate of the MAS party. MAS stands for Movement Towards Socialism. It was a party that really organized originally in the coca growing regions of Bolivia and is what really pushed Morales to national prominence. In Bolivia, or in Venezuela rather, I'm sure most of you have heard of Hugo Chavez, who was first elected in 1998, re-elected several times since then with large majorities. Chavez promotes participatory democracy, Latin American Caribbean cooperation, and what he calls socialism. He's a vociferous opponent of U.S. foreign policy and of the free market policies that typically are glossed as globalization. Chavez has used his oil money to support health, education, and land reform programs in Venezuela and also in the United States. It's not very well known, but Citgo, the national oil and gas company, some of the profits from that have been used to subsidize home heating oil in poor neighborhoods in the United States, such as the South Bronx in New York City. Chavez was briefly forced out of office in 2002 by an attempted coup d'etat, which the United States backed. There's a very interesting film about all of this called The Revolution Shall Not Be Televised that I'd recommend to everyone. In Ecuador, Rafael Correa kind of continues this trend. Correa is a U.S. trained economist. He got his PhD at the University of Illinois. He was first elected in 2006 and re-elected this year with 52% of the vote, which was the first time in 30 years in Ecuador that a candidate got enough votes in the first round of elections that there didn't have to be a runoff. Like Chavez and Morales, Correa is a strong critic of free market policies. A little closer to home in Venezuela, as recent as last March, Mario Funes was elected president. What's interesting about Funes is that he belongs to the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, which is now a political party, but the FMLN was the main guerrilla group that fought in El Salvador's long-running civil war in the 1980s and 90s. What's significant, I think, about Funes' election is that he and the FMLN have displaced a right-wing party called Arena from power. Arena has controlled the government since the end of the Civil War in the 1990s. It was established by an army major called Roberto Dabuisan, who was responsible not only for organizing death squads in El Salvador during the Civil War, but he was also the intellectual author of the assassination of Archbishop Romero. And quite unsurprisingly, he was trained at the School of the Americas. And Joey's going to talk more about the election of Funes in a few minutes. So some other governments, I think, worth noting. In Brazil, Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva is the former head of the Brazilian Steelworkers Union. He was elected in 2002 and re-elected in 2006 for a term that's going to extend into next year. In Uruguay, Fernando Lugo, an ex-priest, who is now president, became nationally prominent because of his support for peasants' demands for land reform, particularly in an area of Paraguay where a lot of Brazilian agro-industrials have been buying up land. And then in Argentina, the Kirchners, first Fernando and then his wife Cristina, have similarly been challenging free market policies in different ways. Now, it's very difficult to generalize about all of these governments. They're by no means the same. But there is one thing that I think unites them, which is a rejection of the 2 decades of free market policies that are commonly referred to, associated with what's known as the Washington Consensus. These policies aggravated social inequality in Latin America by pushing thousands of people into deeper poverty while enriching a few. They spurred out migration, especially from Mexico and Central America, and they led to considerable environmental degradation, especially in tropical lowland parts of the continent. In the U.S., these policies have typically been referred to as free market policies, trickle-down economics. Those of you who are old enough to remember in the 1980s, they referred to as Reaganomics. In Latin America, Latin Americans refer to this as neoliberalism, and that's the term that I'm going to use. I want to first say a little bit about what neoliberalism has meant in Latin America during the last quarter of the 20th century, and then discuss how the new governments are trying to turn things around. First of all, economic neoliberalism entailed a series of reforms that opened Latin America to greater penetration by multinational corporations, weakened the role of the state in the provision of social services, and exposed poor Latin Americans especially to greater market discipline than in the past. A typical package of reforms includes the following. Lowering of tariff barriers. What this meant was that domestic industries that were protected at one time by tariff barriers became newly vulnerable to competition from more highly capitalized multinational firms, and which led to their closure, to more unemployment and so forth. A good example of this, I think, is Mexico, where corn cultivation is deeply rooted in the culture of many Mexican peasants. With the end of tariff barriers for corn, subsidized corn produced in the United States flooded the Mexican market and undercut the ability of peasants to produce and sell their corn. So as a result, many of them could no longer make a go of agriculture anymore and came to the United States in search of alternatives.